The Galactic Academy of Xenobiology was the most famous school in 12 star systems, and students came from every corner of the known galaxy to study there and learn about the countless species that lived among the stars. Professor Velthrani stood at the front of Lecture Hall Omega 7 and waited for her students to settle into their seats, and she was not like most beings in the galaxy because her body was made entirely of living crystal that shifted colors based on her emotions, and right now her crystals were a deep blue that showed she was preparing for something serious. 47 students filled the room, and each one sat in a special environmental pod designed for their species because the galaxy was home to so many different kinds of life, and each one needed different conditions to survive. The Quillari floated in bubbles filled with ammonia gas because they could not breathe oxygen, and they looked like collections of tentacles with large, curious eyes, and their skin changed colors when they felt strong emotions. The Tricks were musical beings who communicated through harmonics and songs, and they sat in sonic dampeners that protected them from the harsh sounds of other species, and their bodies were long and thin with membranes that vibrated when they spoke. The Variks were serpentine creatures with beautiful scales that shifted through every color of the rainbow, and they coiled around temperature-controlled perches because they needed warmth. To think clearly, all of these students had one thing in common, and that was the fact that they came from paradise worlds where life was easy and safe, and where the very idea of danger was something they only read about in books. Professor Velthrani activated the holographic display at the center of the room, and a beautiful blue and green planet appeared floating in the air, and it rotated slowly, showing its oceans and continents and swirling white clouds. Today we will discuss Earth, the professor announced, and her voice carried easily through the hall. Classification is Death World, and the category is 12. A young Quillari named Pix raised one of her tentacles, and her skin had turned a confused shade of yellow. Professor, I thought the Death World scale only went to category 10. It did, Velthrani replied, and her crystals darkened to an almost black color. Until we discovered Earth. The students shifted nervously in their pods, and some of them had never even heard of a category 10 world, because such places were so rare and so dangerous that most species avoided them. Entirely a confident Vorax named Sethril raised his head from his perch, and his scales glittered with self-assurance. Surely the classification is an error, because how can any world exceed the maximum rating on the scale? There is no error, the professor said calmly. The Galactic Council created Category 12 specifically for Earth, because no existing classification could properly describe how dangerous it is. Meladine was a Trick student who sat near the front, and she emitted a low, worried harmonic. What makes it so different from other Death Worlds? Velthrani let the question hang in the air for a moment, and she looked at her students with something that might have been pity, because they had no idea what they were about to learn. Before I answer that question, I want to ask all of you something, she said. Does anyone here know why Earth is classified as a death world, and what makes its native species so remarkable? Silence filled the lecture hall, and the students looked at each other with confusion, because most of them had never studied Earth before, and some of them had never even heard of it until they saw it on the course list. Tisrol spoke up again because he did not like to appear ignorant. I assume it has dangerous predators, and perhaps some hostile environmental conditions. The professor made a sound like wind chimes caught in a storm, and the students realized she was laughing, but not in a happy way. Large predators, she repeated. Yes, Earth has those, but they are the least dangerous thing about the planet, and by the end of this lecture, you will understand why the Galactic Council spent 300 years debating whether to make contact with Earth's dominant species. A small Quillari in the back of the room raised a trembling tentacle. 300 years seems like a very long time to make such a decision. It was not long enough. Velthrani said, some council members argued that we should never make contact at all, and that we should quarantine the entire solar system and pretend we never found it. The students exchanged worried glances because quarantine was only suggested for the most extreme threats, and it was a measure that had only been used twice in galactic history. What species could possibly be so dangerous? Meladine asked, and her harmonics had become high, and Nervous Velthrani touched the control, and they. Holographic Earth zoomed in to show the surface, and the students could see mountains and forests and vast plains of grass, and it looked almost peaceful. The species is called humanity, the professor said, and they call themselves humans, and they are unlike anything else we have ever encountered in all our centuries of exploration. Pix leaned forward in her ammonia bubble. Are they very large and powerful? No. Do they have natural weapons like claws or venomous fangs? No. Are they incredibly fast or strong? No, they are not. Sethral made a dismissive sound. Then how can they possibly be dangerous enough to warrant a new classification? Professor Velthrani's crystals shifted to a color that none of the students had ever seen before. And it was somewhere between deep red and pure white, and it made them all feel very uncomfortable. That is exactly what the council asked when they first discovered Earth, she said, and that is exactly what we will explore today. She dimmed the lights in the lecture hall until only the glowing hologram of Earth remained, and the students could see how beautiful and peaceful it looked from space. I want all of you to remember something, Velthrani said quietly. Every species in this room evolved on worlds that were kind to them, and your planets had stable weather and gentle seasons and predators that could be avoided with basic caution. She paused and let her words sink in. Earth is not like your worlds, and Earth does not care about the survival of its inhabitants, and Earth has been trying to kill everything on its surface for 4 billion years. The hologram began to change, and the peaceful blue planet started to reveal its true nature, and the students watched with growing horror as they began to understand. And yet, the professor continued, humans did not merely survive on this world, but they conquered it completely, and they became the most successful species their planet has ever produced. She turned to face her students directly, and her crystal body caught the light of the hologram. Let us begin with the planet itself, and then you will understand why humans are the way they are. The lecture had only just started, and already several students were beginning to wish they had chosen a different course. Professor Velthrani expanded the holographic display, and the beautiful image of Earth transformed into something far more terrifying as layers of the planet became visible, showing its inner structure. The first thing you must understand about Earth is that the planet itself is unstable, she began, and her crystals had settled into a serious gray color. Most worlds in the galaxy have solid crusts that do not move, but Earth is different. The hologram showed the planet's outer shell, and it was cracked into massive pieces, like a broken egg that someone had tried to put back together. Earth's crust is divided into sections called tectonic plates, and these plates float on a layer of molten rock beneath the surface, and they are constantly moving and grinding against each other. Sethral tilted his serpentine head. How fast do they move? Slowly by your standards, but they never stop, and when they collide or separate, the results are catastrophic. The hologram shifted to show a city filled with tall buildings, and suddenly the ground began to shake, and the buildings swayed and cracked and collapsed, and dust filled the air as thousands of structures fell. This is called an earthquake, Velthrani explained. The ground itself shakes and splits apart, and buildings fall, and the earth opens up to swallow everything above it. Dix's tentacles had curled tightly around herself. Surely humans avoid the areas where these earthquakes happen. They do not, the professor said, and her tone was matter-of-fact. Some of the largest human cities are built directly on top of the most active fault lines, and millions of humans choose to live in these places knowing that the ground could destroy everything at any moment. Meladine emitted a discordant note of confusion. Why would any rational species do this? Because humans are not always rational in ways that we understand, and they weigh risk differently than we do. The hologram changed again, and now it showed a massive wave of water, taller than the tallest buildings, rushing toward a coastline and sweeping away everything in its path. When earthquakes happen beneath the ocean, they create waves called tsunamis, and these walls of water can be dozens of meters high, and they travel faster than most vehicles, and they destroy entire cities when they reach the shore. A small trick student in the middle of the room stopped humming entirely, which was a sign of extreme distress among her species. But the instability does not end there. Valfrani continued, and she showed images of mountains with smoke and fire pouring from their peaks. Earth has hundreds of active volcanoes, and these are places where molten rock from deep inside the planet erupts to the surface. The hologram displayed rivers of glowing orange rock flowing down mountainsides and burying forests and villages, and the students could almost feel the heat radiating from the images. Volcanic eruptions release poisonous gases and bury everything nearby under layers of molten stone, and the largest eruptions can throw so much ash into the atmosphere that it blocks out the sun for years. And humans live near these as well, Sethral guessed, and his earlier confidence had completely disappeared. They farm on the slopes of active volcanoes because the soil there is very fertile, and when asked if they are afraid of eruptions, they say that the risk is worth the reward. Velthrani shifted the hologram to show Earth's atmosphere and the swirling patterns of clouds that covered parts of the planet. Now let us discuss the weather, because on your worlds, the weather is stable and predictable, but on Earth, the weather is a weapon. The display showed a massive spinning storm system hundreds of kilometers across with an empty eye in its center. This is called a hurricane, and it is a rotating storm with winds strong enough to tear buildings apart and rain heavy enough to flood entire regions, and these storms can last for days and travel across vast distances. The image changed to show a long funnel of spinning wind touching down from dark clouds and ripping through a landscape. This is a tornado, and it is a column of rotating air that descends from storm clouds and destroys everything it touches, and tornadoes can appear with very little warning and change direction unpredictably. Pixie's ammonia bubble had begun to cloud with stress chemicals. Surely humans hide from these storms. Some do, but others chase them. Velthrani said calmly, chase them. Meladine repeated, and her harmonics suggested she had not heard correctly. Yes, there are humans who deliberately follow tornadoes and hurricanes, and they drive vehicles into the paths of these storms to observe them more closely. For what purpose? Sethral demanded. Entertainment and scientific curiosity, and sometimes just to prove they can. The lecture hall had become very quiet, and even the environmental pods seemed to hum with tension. I have not yet mentioned lightning. The professor continued. Earth's atmosphere generates massive electrical discharges that strike the ground randomly, and these bolts carry enough energy to kill instantly, and they start fires that can burn for weeks. She showed images of bright, jagged lines of light splitting the sky and striking trees and buildings and the ground itself, or floods where water falls from the sky in such quantities that rivers overflow and cover the land in deep water and drown everything that cannot escape in time, or blizzards where frozen water falls as snow, and temperatures drop so low that exposed flesh freezes solid within minutes, and entire regions become buried under meters of ice. Valthrani paused and looked at her students, and she could see that many of them were struggling to process what they were hearing. On your worlds, you check the weather to decide what to wear, but on Earth, humans check the weather to see what might try to kill them today. She let that statement settle over the room like a heavy blanket. And we have not yet discussed the other living things on Earth, because the planet's instability and harshness created an evolutionary pressure unlike anything else in the galaxy. The hologram filled with images of creatures, and the students saw animals with massive jaws and sharp teeth and claws and stingers and fangs. Dripping with venom, life on Earth is engaged in an endless war with itself, and every species is either a predator or prey, and often both at the same time. And evolution has produced biological weapons of incredible variety and lethality. Sharks with rows of regenerating teeth filled the display, followed by big cats that could run faster than ground vehicles, followed by snakes with venom that could kill in minutes, followed by spiders and scorpions and insects of every terrifying variety. There are parasites that burrow into other creatures and eat them from inside, and there are bacteria and viruses that can kill billions, and there are plants that produce poisons, and animals that hunt in packs with coordinated strategies. The students stared at the parade of horrors, and many of them had activated calming features in their environmental pods. Earth is not a planet, Velthrani said. It is an arena where life has been fighting for survival for billions of years, and only the most adaptable and resilient species survive. She cleared the display and let darkness fill the room for a moment. And somehow, in the middle of all this chaos, one species rose above everything else and became the undisputed master of this deadly world. The hologram showed a single human standing on a hillside and looking out over the landscape, and the human had no claws and no fangs and no armor and no venom, and looked utterly unremarkable compared to the creatures they had just seen. How? Pix whispered. How did they survive, Professor? Velthrani's crystals flickered with something that might have been admiration. That is what we will discuss next, and I promise you the answer is more terrifying than anything I have shown you so far. The lecture hall remained dark, except for the soft glow of the holographic display, and the students had not moved from their pods, and some of them looked like they were considering leaving, but none of them actually did, because the curiosity was too strong. Professor Velthrani stood at the center of the room, and her crystal body caught what little light there was and scattered it in patterns across the walls. You have seen the predators of Earth, she said. Creatures with claws that can tear through metal, and jaws that can crush bone, and venom that can stop a heart in seconds. She paused and looked at each of her students in turn. And now I will show you the most successful predator the planet has ever produced. The hologram displayed a human standing in an open grassland, and the human was nearly naked, wearing only simple coverings and carrying a wooden stick with a sharpened point and a container made from animal skin. This cannot be correct, Sethril said immediately. This creature has no natural weapons and no armor, and it does not even have proper fur to protect it from the elements. You are absolutely right, Velthrani agreed. Humans have no claws and no fangs and no venom, and their skin is thin and easily damaged. And they are not particularly fast, and they are not particularly strong. Meladine hummed thoughtfully. Then how did they become apex predators? Through 3 evolutionary advantages that no other species in the known galaxy has ever developed. In the same combination, the professor raised one crystalline finger that caught the light. First advantage is their method of movement and temperature regulation, and most animals on Earth cool themselves by panting, which requires them to stop moving and rest, but humans developed a different system. The hologram showed the human beginning to jog across the grassland, and sweat appeared on the human skin. Humans cool themselves through sweating, and this allows them to regulate their body temperature while continuing to move. And this means that humans can run for hours without stopping, while other animals must rest or die from overheating. Pix's tentacles twitched. Hours of continuous running seems excessive. It is not excessive for a human, because trained humans can run for entire days without stopping, and they can cover distances that would kill most other species from exhaustion. The second finger rose. Second advantage is their brain, and humans have pattern recognition. abilities that far exceed most other species, and they can track prey across vast distances, and they can remember terrain, and they can predict animal behavior based on observation. The hologram showed the human examining marks on the ground, and broken vegetation, and then looking toward the horizon with focused intensity. A human can follow an animal for days using only the traces it leaves behind, and they can anticipate where the animal will go and cut off escape routes, and they never lose the trail. The third finger rose. Third advantage is what makes humans truly terrifying, and it is something that we have no proper word for in most galactic languages, but humans call it determination or willpower or stubbornness. Velthrani. Let that word hang in the air. Humans do not give up, and when they decide to pursue something, they continue until they succeed, or until they physically cannot continue, and even then they often keep trying. The hologram began to play a sequence, and the students watched with growing unease. The human started jogging after a fast four-legged animal that looked like it could run faster than any creature the students had ever seen, and the animal sprinted away with explosive speed and quickly disappeared over a hill. Watch, the professor said quietly. The human did not sprint, and the human did not panic, and the human simply continued jogging at the same steady pace, following the trail the animal had left, and eventually the human crested the hill, and in the distance the animal was standing and panting heavily, trying to cool down. The animal saw the human and sprinted away again with incredible speed, and once again it quickly disappeared from view, and once again the human simply kept jogging. This hunting method is called persistence hunting. Velthrani explained. The human does not need to catch the prey, and the human does not need to be faster, and the human only needs to keep following. The sequence continued, and the students watched as this pattern repeated again and again, and each time the animal ran, it went a shorter distance, and each time it stopped to rest, it panted harder, and its movements became less coordinated. Most prey animals cannot understand what is happening, the professor said. They escape, and they feel safe, and then the human appears again, and they escape again and feel safe again, and then the human appears again. Melodine's harmonics had become high and strained. It never stops. Never. And this is the key. And the animal runs until it cannot run anymore, and it pants until panting cannot cool it down, and eventually it collapses from exhaustion and overheating. The hologram showed the final moment, and the animal fell to the ground, unable to stand, and the human walked up calmly and ended the hunt quickly with the sharpened stick. Humans are not fast. Velthrani said, humans are inevitable. The words seemed to echo in the silent lecture hall. Now imagine that you are the prey. The professor continued. You run with all your speed, and you escape easily, and you feel safe, and you rest, and then you look back, and the human is still there walking toward you at the same steady pace. You run again and escape again and rest again and look back, and the human is still there getting closer. This continues for hours, and you are getting tired, but the human shows no signs of stopping, and you realize that you cannot escape, because no matter how far you run, the human will follow. Eventually, you are too exhausted to run and too tired to fight, and you simply wait for the end. Sethral's scales had lost all their color. This is psychological warfare. It is survival, Velthrani corrected. And this instinct has never left humanity, even though they no longer need to hunt this way. The hologram changed to show modern humans in various situations, and the students saw runners in races that lasted for entire days, and soldiers marching through hostile terrain, and explorers climbing impossible mountains, and scientists working on problems for decades without giving up. When a human decides to achieve something, they pursue it with the same relentless determination that their ancestors used to hunt, and their literature is filled with stories praising this quality. The display showed snippets of human text, and the students saw phrases like, "never surrender," and "keep going," and failure is not an option. Humans admire persistence above almost all other qualities, the professor said. They tell stories about heroes who refuse to give up, and they teach their children that the most important thing is to keep trying no matter what. Pick spoke in a small voice. What happens when a human pursues something other than food? They pursue it with the same determination, and this includes goals and dreams and knowledge and also enemies. Velfrani's crystals shifted to a darker shade. If a human decides that you are their enemy, then you will never know peace, because they will follow you across continents and across years and across generations if necessary, and they will not stop until one of you is destroyed. Human history is filled with conflicts that lasted for centuries because neither side would give up, and they have sayings about this such as revenge is a dish best served cold, which means they are willing to wait years or decades for the right moment to strike. Meladine had stopped humming entirely. Professor, this species sounds extremely dangerous. They are the most dangerous species in the known galaxy, Velfrani agreed. But I have not yet told you the most important part. She cleared the hologram and stood in the darkness. Everything I have described so far explains how humans survive and how they hunt, but it does not explain how they became the dominant species on their world and how they built civilizations that span their entire planet. For that you must understand their greatest strength, and it is something that the Galactic Council found even more concerning than their physical abilities. The students leaned forward in their pods, despite their fear. Humans are pack bonders, the professor said, and what that means will change everything you think you know about this species. Professor Velfrani called for a brief recess after the discussion of persistence hunting, because several students had become so distressed that their environmental pods had triggered medical alerts, and 3 of them required attention from the Academy's health services. When the lecture resumed, the room felt different, and the students who had seemed confident at the beginning now sat quietly in their pods with a new understanding of what they were dealing with. We have discussed how humans survive their deadly world, the professor began. But survival alone does not explain their dominance, and many species can survive harsh conditions without becoming the masters of their planets. She activated the hologram, and the display showed a human child sitting on grass, and next to the child was a large 4-legged creature with thick fur and a long snout filled with sharp teeth. This creature is called a dog, Velfrani explained. It is descended from wolves, which were one of the most effective pack hunters on Earth, and wolves have powerful jaws and excellent endurance, and they work together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Sethril studied the image carefully. The wolf sounds like a competitor, species and potential threat to humans. They were exactly that for thousands of years, and wolves and humans competed for the same prey, and sometimes wolves killed humans and sometimes humans killed wolves. Then why is a human child sitting so close to one? Pix asked. Because humans did something that no other species in galactic records has ever done, the professor said. Instead of exterminating their competitors, they befriended them. The hologram showed ancient humans approaching wolves with offerings of food, and the students watched as generation after generation the wolves became less wild and more comfortable around humans. Humans took wolf pups and raised them alongside their own young, and they fed them and cared for them and taught them to work together with humans instead of against them. Over thousands of years, humans selectively bred wolves into hundreds of different varieties, and some became hunting partners, and some became guardians, and some became herders who helped control other animals, and some became companions who served no practical purpose except to provide friendship. Meladin hummed with confusion. They transformed a predator into a companion through patience and selective breeding. Yes, and this is what we call pack bonding, and it is an instinct so powerful in humans that it defines almost everything about their civilization. The hologram cycled through images of humans with countless different animals, and the students saw humans riding on the backs of massive creatures called horses, and humans working alongside huge gray animals with long noses called elephants, and humans with birds of prey perched on their arms. Humans will attempt to bond with almost anything, Valfrani said. Predators and prey animals and venomous reptiles and creatures that could kill them easily, and they approach all of them with the same desire to form a connection. A small Varick student spoke up. Is this not dangerous and foolish? It is extremely dangerous, and humans are frequently injured or killed by animals they were trying to befriend, but they keep doing it anyway, because the instinct is too strong to ignore. The professor paused, and her crystals shifted to a thoughtful purple color. You must understand that humans evolved as a social species in an incredibly hostile environment, and alone a human is vulnerable to almost everything on Earth. But in groups, humans become much more powerful. The more allies a human could gather, the better their chances of survival. And so evolution favored humans who could form strong bonds quickly, and who could expand their definition of pack to include more and more members. The hologram showed humans in groups, and students could see them working together and protecting each other, and sharing food and caring for injured members. This pack bonding instinct became so strong that humans began applying it to things that were not even alive. Valfrani continued. The display showed a human crying over a broken machine, and another human talking to a vehicle as if it could understand, and another human giving a name to a plant growing in a container. Humans form emotional attachments to machines and tools and objects and places, and they experience genuine distress when these things are damaged or lost. Sethril made a skeptical sound. That seems like a psychological defect. Perhaps, but it is a defect that helped them survive, and by forming attachments to their tools, humans took better care of them, and tools that are well maintained last longer and work better. The professor moved to the center of the room, and her crystal body caught the holographic light. Now I must tell you the thing that concerned the Galactic Council most of all, and it is the reason they debated for 3 centuries before making contact with humanity. She let the silence build. Humans extend their pack bonding instinct to other intelligent species, including us. The statement landed like a physical blow, and several students made sounds of surprise or distress. When humans first learned that alien life existed, their immediate reaction was not fear, and it was not aggression, and it was curiosity followed quickly by a desire to make friends. The hologram showed footage from first contact, and the students saw human diplomats approaching alien delegations with expressions of wonder and excitement, and the humans were smiling and reaching out with this open hands. They wanted to learn about us and find common ground and establish friendships and add us to their pack. Pix's tentacles were trembling. They wanted to befriend species they had never seen before, immediately and enthusiastically. And this is how humans approach almost everything new. And their first instinct is to ask, can this be a friend? Melodine's harmonics had become complex and uncertain. Is this not a good thing, and should we not welcome species that want friendship? That is exactly what the council debated, Valthrani replied, because human friendship is not casual or temporary. And when humans decide you are part of their pack, they will do almost anything for you. The hologram showed humans running into burning buildings to save strangers, and humans donating organs to people they had never met, in humans traveling across the world to help after disasters, and humans standing between danger and those they had decided to protect. Humans have died for members of other species, the professor said quietly. They have risked everything to protect beings who were not human, simply because they had decided those beings were friends. They do not require that you prove your worth or pass tests or meet standards, and they simply decide that you matter to them, and after that decision, nothing will stop them from trying to help you. Sethril seemed to be struggling with something. This sounds like it should be reassuring, but somehow it is not. You are beginning to understand. Velthrani said with what might have been approval. Human friendship is not passive and it is not gentle. And it is the friendship of persistence hunters and pack bonders. Once a human has decided you, our pack, they will follow you across the galaxy, and they will protect you from threats you did not know existed. And they will solve your problems, whether you ask them to or not. They will remember your birthday and check on you when you are sick and worry about you when you do not communicate for a while, and they will take it personally if someone harms you. The professor's crystals had shifted to an intense white color. The Galactic Council was not afraid that humans would attack. US, because humans rarely attack without provocation, and they were afraid that humans would love us. They were afraid that humans would decide the entire galaxy was their pack, and that they would appoint themselves protectors of every species they encountered, and that they would pursue this goal with the same relentless determination they use for everything else. Pick spoke slowly. They would not ask permission. They never do, and humans see a being in trouble, and they help, and they help. And they do not stop to ask if their help is wanted, and they do not wait for formal requests, and they simply act. Because that is what pack members do. The hologram showed humans and aliens working together and laughing together, and the images showed friendships that had formed in the years since first contact. And the most unsettling part, Velthrani concluded, is that it works, and beings who spend time with humans begin to care about them in return, and before long, you find yourself part of their pack, whether you intended to join or not. She looked at her students with ancient knowing eyes. Humans do not conquer through force alone, because they conquer through affection. And once they have decided to love you, there is no escape. The lecture had stretched far beyond its scheduled time, and the suns had moved across the sky outside the great windows of Lecture Hall Omega 7, and still no student had left. And no student had complained because what they were learning felt too important to Miss Professor Velthrani stood before them, and her crystal body had cycled through every color during the course of the lecture. And now it had settled into something warm and golden that made the students feel strangely calm. You came to this lecture expecting to learn about a dangerous species from a dangerous world, she said. You expected to study a threat that needed to be understood and contained and managed. She paused and looked at each of her students in turn, and her ancient eyes held something that might have been affection. I hope I have shown you something more complex than that. The hologram activated one final time and displayed an image of a human astronaut standing on the surface of a moon far from Earth, and the human was planting a flag in the rocky ground, and behind the visor of the helmet, the human was smiling with pure joy. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Velthrani said. The ground shook beneath them, and the sky threw lightning at them, and the oceans drowned their cities, and predators hunted them in the darkness. By every reasonable calculation, they should have gone extinct 1,000 times over, because their world gave them no advantages, and no protection, and no mercy. She let that image hang in the air, and the students stared at the smiling human who had traveled so far from that deadly world. But they did not go extinct, and instead, they survived. And then they thrived, and then they conquered their entire planet. They tamed the predators that hunted them, and turned them into companions, and they built shelters that could withstand earthquakes and hurricanes, and they learned to predict the disasters that once killed them. By the thousands, they split atoms and flew through the air, and dove to the bottom of their deepest oceans, and eventually they looked up at the stars, and decided to go there too. The hologram showed human spacecraft leaving Earth and traveling to other worlds in their system, and eventually to other stars, and the students watched the progression with something like awe. When humans finally met other species in the galaxy, they encountered something they had never experienced before. The professor continued. They met beings who had evolved on gentle worlds under kind suns, and beings who had never known true hardship or danger. Pick spoke softly. They met us. Yes, they met you, and they met the Quillari, and the Tricks, and the Varks, and dozens of other species who had never needed to become strong because their worlds had never demanded strength. Velthrani moved closer to her students, and her golden light seemed to embrace them. And do you know what humans saw when they looked at you? The students were silent and waiting. They did not see weakness to be exploited, or resources to be claimed, or threats to be eliminated, and they saw friends who had simply never needed to learn how to fight. And so they appointed themselves your protectors. Sethril stirred on his perch. They appointed themselves without asking our permission. Of course they did, because that is what humans do. And they saw beings they cared about, and they saw dangers those beings could not handle. And they decided to stand between them, not through any vote or treaty or formal agreement, but through pure instinct, because that is what pack leaders do, and that is what persistence hunters do. And that is what beings from a death world do when they find others who need protection. Meladine hummed a complex chord. Are you saying we should trust them? Professor Velthrani made that wind chime sound that was her version of a gentle laugh. Trust is not relevant to this situation, and humans do not require your trust or your approval or your permission. If they have decided you are part of their pack, and I assure you they decided that the moment they met us, then they will protect you, whether you want them to or not. They will fight for you, and they will die for you, and they will cross the entire galaxy for you, and nothing you say or do will change their minds, because humans do not give up on their pack. She deactivated the hologram and let darkness fill the room except for the warm golden glow of her crystal body. The question you should be asking is not whether humans are dangerous, because of course they are, and everything on Earth is dangerous, and humans are the most dangerous thing Earth ever produced. The question you should be asking is this. She let the silence stretch. What kind of galaxy do you want to live in? Do you want a galaxy where each species fends for itself, and where the strong prey on the weak, and where no one comes to help when disaster strikes? Or do you want a galaxy where the deadliest creatures ever to evolve have decided that friendship is worth fighting for, and that protecting the innocent is more important than personal safety? The students sat in stunned silence, and the question hung in the air like something physical that they could almost touch. Finally, Pix spoke, and her voice was small but steady. I think I would like to meet a human someday. Meladine hummed agreement, and Sethril's scales had returned to their normal colors, and even the students who had needed medical attention earlier seemed calmer now. Professor Velthrani smiled, which was a strange expression for a crystalline being, but somehow the students knew it was a smile. I think that can be arranged. She moved toward the door and stopped at the threshold. Remember what you learned today, and remember that humans are not monsters, and they are not saints, and they are simply beings who evolved on a world that demanded everything from them, and who responded by becoming everything they needed to be. They are stubborn and loyal and determined, and they will never stop trying to help those they care about. And for reasons that they themselves do not fully understand, they have decided to care about all of us. She left the lecture hall, and the students began to gather their things and talk quietly among themselves about everything they had learned. Outside, in the corridor, a maintenance worker was repairing a light fixture that had been flickering for days, and he was a middle-aged human named Marcus who had taken a job at the academy because he liked meeting new people from different worlds. When the students filed out of the lecture hall, Marcus looked up from his work and gave them a friendly wave and a warm smile. "Hey there," he said cheerfully. "Good lecture today." 47 students from 12 different species stopped and stared at him with new eyes. He was average height for a human and average build, and he had no claws and no fangs and no armor, and he looked completely unremarkable. But now the students knew what he really was. He was descended from persistence hunters who had chased prey across endless plains until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. He was descended from pack bonders who had turned wolves into dogs and who had formed connections with every creature they encountered. He was descended from survivors who had endured earthquakes and hurricanes and volcanic eruptions and ice ages and plagues and wars. He was from a death world, and he was one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. And right now he was smiling at them and asking about their day. "Yeah," Pix managed to say, and her tentacles had stopped trembling. "It was a really good lecture." Marcus grinned even wider. "That is great to hear, and you all have a wonderful day now, and do not hesitate to ask if you need anything, because I am always happy to help." He went back to his work and started humming a cheerful tune that the students did not recognize. They dispersed slowly across the academy grounds, and each of them was lost in thought, everything they had learned. They had come to the lecture expecting to learn why Earth was dangerous. They had left understanding something far more profound. Earth had produced the only species in the galaxy that would walk through fire for strangers and befriend apex predators and chase their dreams across the void of space and never give up on the people they had decided to love, and somehow, against all odds and against all reason, those stubborn, terrifying, wonderful creatures had decided to love everyone. Galaxy would never be the same, and the students were beginning to think that might be a very good thing.